Thanks for joining me as we briefly discuss the history of psychology. Psychology can trace its roots back to philosophy, and many of the debates and core themes within psychology began as philosophical debates. But think about what happens when two equally intelligent and respected philosophers disagree about the nature of human experience. How do we decide who is right? Maybe they each have an equally eloquent, well reasoned, and logical argument. One way to solve the debate is to rely on empiricism or the scientific method. We can use systematic observation and scientific data to answer questions about human behavior and experiences. And so psychologists began to employ the scientific method. And in doing this, we broke with philosophy to establish an independent field of study. Wundt, considered by most to be the father of psychology, established what is known as the first psychology research lab in Germany in 1879. He, along with his student Titchener, promoted an approach to psychology termed structuralism. The general idea is that we could best understand the complexities of the human experience by first breaking these experiences down into their component parts and examining the basic structure. This is intuitively appealing if we compare it to the process of understanding chemistry by cataloging basic elements or understanding biology by examining the cells that make up organisms. Bund and Titchener employed a scientific method called introspection, in which researchers would undergo hundreds of hours of training to appropriately analyze and report each minute sensation and perception they experienced when exposed to a stimulus. Imagine reporting in excruciating detail the tactile sensations of holding an apple or tasting an orange. Now, the problem was that different researchers, all utilizing introspection, may have dramatically different results. Experience is highly subjective, and despite extensive training in introspection, there were differences in their reports, and there was no clear, observable metric to determine accuracy of introspective reports. Think about a scale to measure weight. What if each scale you stepped on told you a different number? On one, maybe you weigh 140 pounds, and on another, 210 pounds. This would be a big problem. What's more is that some in the field began to argue that cataloging the basic elements of experience was not a worthwhile goal to begin with. Knowing the elements of behavior tells me nothing about the purpose of that behavior. Functionalism argued that we should focus not just on the what, but also the why. How do we use mental processes and what function do they serve? Now, psychodynamic theory doesn't fit well with this evolution of the field, but Freud wasn't one to fit into a box or a timeline. He'll forever stand out in the history of the field. We'll talk more about Freud and the psychodynamic approach in the chapter on personality. Personality psychology attempts to understand what makes people unique, how they develop the tendencies and uniqueness in the ways that they think, feel, how they act in predictable ways. Why does your best friend talk all the time, but maybe your mom is quiet and shy? Freud focused on unconscious conflicts and early childhood experiences, primarily trauma, as explanations for behavioral patterns and psychological symptoms. His therapy approach, psychoanalysis, with techniques of free association and dream analysis, influenced modern psychotherapy approaches. Freud's goal was to bring unconscious material into conscious awareness to promote insight and resolution of inner conflicts. Although many of his ideas have not stood up to rigorous scientific tests, his influence on the field and the culture at large is pretty undeniable. Behaviorism can be seen as a reaction to both structuralism and psychodynamic theory. The behaviorists argued that psychology would never be taken seriously as a scientific field if we continue to focus on the unreliable introspective method and Freud's unconscious conflicts that can't be measured or observed at all. Psychological study must limit itself to only those aspects of human experience that can be directly observed, recorded, and measured. To them, only overt behavioral responses mattered, not the inner workings of the mind or the psyche. Psych- Behaviorists studied stimulus response patterns in which environmental stimuli were thought to evoke predictable responses without the need to speculate or study subjective perceptions, motivations, or feelings. Behavior is learned through interactions with the environment. Your behavior, everything about you, is shaped by your external environment. Your friend talks because she experienced an environment that rewarded talkativeness. The work of Pavlov, Watson, and B.F. Skinner revolutionized our understanding of behavior and established learning principles that remain fundamental to the fields of psychology and education today. As behaviorism was taking hold in America, Gestalt psychology was flourishing in Germany. Again, a reaction to structuralism, the Gestalts argued that we cannot understand the human experience by breaking it down into its component parts. Experience is more than the sum of its parts, and something is lost when we break it down. Just like a painting is more than the individual brushstrokes, or a symphony is more than the individual notes, or even the individual instruments. Connection, structure, and organization are key, right? Who we are is in the harmony. The humanistic approach to psychology emerges as a reaction to both behaviorism and psychodynamic theories, aiming to focus on the positive aspects of human experience and consciousness. Consistent with Gestalt theory, humanistic psychology emphasizes the study of individuals as a whole, not elements or individual symptoms. Humanistic psychology has grown in popularity for several decades and promotes one's capacity for self-determination, personal growth, and the pursuit of meaning and fulfillment. Key figures such as Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow argue that people are basically good at their core and driven to fulfill their full potential when given supportive and nurturing environments. The cognitive approach to psychology is a perspective that focuses on the study of mental processes, including how people think, perceive, remember, and solve problems. Unlike behaviorism, which emphasizes observable behavior, the cognitive approach seeks to understand the internal mental structures and processes that influence behavior. The perspective gained prominence in the 1950s and 60s as a reaction to behaviorism's limitations in explaining complex human behaviors. Although 1879 may seem like a long time ago, compared to scientific fields such as chemistry or physics, psychology is relatively young. I say that not to diminish the achievements of psychological science. In fact, the opposite. It's amazing the progress in research methods and technology in such a short period of time. But the human experience, even our most simple behaviors, are so incredibly complex. There's still so much that remains unknown, so much left to discover. It's exciting to stand at the forefront of this science and think that you could be the next person to change the history of the field.